Hello everybody, my name is Jake, and you've probably found this video because you are wondering how on earth to use Hammer, the world editor for the Source Engine SDK. Well, I'm going to go over the basics and show you how to get started. So what you're going to want to do is open up Steam, and you're going to want to go to your library, and under Tools, you're going to find something called the Portal 2 Authoring Tools Beta. This is the one that I'm going to be using today. You can use the one that comes with the default Source SDK, but that only allows you to access the Half-Life games, Team Fortress 2, and the original Portal, which granted is most of the important Source games, but I'm going to be showing you how to do it with Portal 2 today because that's the one that I've currently got on my computer. And it's the one that, is I think most commonly used because Portal 2 has a prolific map building scene. Although anything that you learn here you can apply to Hammer anywhere because it's the same across anything. So double click on it, and then you're going to get a little green window like this, and it's got some other things in here. Just ignore those. What we want is the Hammer World Editor. You're going to double click on that, and that's going to bring up Hammer. Now at the moment it's blank, so what you're going to want to do is go File, New, and that's going to open up several windows. Now I've got my windows configured a little differently. Yours won't look like this probably, but what you've got essentially is you should have three windows, and that three windows with grids, and then one that's just black. I got rid of one of the grid windows. But the grid windows essentially are 2D planes on your map. So this one right here is the top, and if you mouse over in the top left-hand corner, it'll display which window it is. But essentially this one right here is the top, so it's showing me the X and Y plane across this grid here. And then this right here is the side, so it's showing me the X and Z plane. So there's three planes, and if you mouse over the one that's black, it says camera up in the top left-hand corner. This is your three-dimensional viewer that allows you to view sort of a slightly pre-rendered version of what your map is going to look like. And so if you mouse over it and then hit the Z key, then it'll lock your cursor to the window, and then you can move around using WASD like you would in a normal game, and then you can look around with the mouse. So I'm looking at the center point of my map here. We got the X and Y axis and then the Z axis. And so this will show you sort of what your shapes and stuff are going to look like. This will play a bigger role in a second. So with the grids here, what you're going to want to do is go over to one of these buttons here. Now, these buttons do a variety of things. Just ignore most of these up here at the top, except these two here. These are your grid size buttons, but we'll get to those in a second. These buttons here do a variety of things. The most important one is probably this one up here at the top. This is your pointer button, and this is what you're going to use if you want to select things, because in Hammer, depending upon which one of these buttons you have pushed, your cursor will do different things. So if you push this one, then your cursor will just be able to select things, and that's all it can do. And this is what you want to do if you want to select something to change its properties, or select something to move it around. Very, very important. And then the next one down is search, and then there's camera. Those aren't really important. But the next two that we're going to want to focus on is the entity tool and then the brush tool. Now the brush tool is what we're going to want to use right now, so go ahead and select it, and then go to your top window, whichever one it happens to be, and you just want to click and drag, and that'll make a little square like that. Because what the brush tool does is it's what you use to generate surfaces. And so you can see here I clicked and I dragged, and that created a surface along this two-dimensional plane, along the X and Y plane. And so you can see here on my side window that it created a similar looking shape. Adjusting my microphone there. It created a similar looking shape, but along a different plane. Now, it's got this thickness because of these grid squares. Now, these two buttons up here that I mentioned earlier, you can click on the minus one and it'll make your grid smaller. Click on the plus one, it'll make your grid bigger. When you're first building the general outline of your map, you generally want to keep your grid size fairly big. Not like too big like that, but just about this size. And so now that you've got the shape, what you're going to want to do is hit enter, and that will generate the brush. So now you can see here in my 3D view, if I mouse over it, hit Z, I can now move around. You can see it's generated this block. And so now this block exists in three-dimensional space, and the engine's going to render it. Now, it doesn't look real great. So what we want to do is choose a texture that's slightly more friendly and nicer to look at. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to this little window here. This is our texture window. And you're going to want to hit Browse next to this box. This box displays the texture that you've currently got selected. So you hit Browse. This is going to bring up all the textures for whatever game you happen to be working in. If you're working with Half-Life or if you're working with Half-Life 2 or any of the Half-Life episodes, it'll bring up all the textures from those. If you're working with TF2, it'll bring up all the textures from those. Same thing with, Left 4 Dead, Original Portal, etc., etc. So I've got all the textures from Portal 2 here. And some of them are actually from Original Portal because they left most of the assets in there. So I'm just going to want to find one that looks nice. And generally, I like to use this one here because it sticks to this grid size and it looks nice, which isn't too important. So now that I've got it selected, it's here in this box. That means it's the texture that I'm currently using. I'm going to want to hit this button here. Actually, no. Back up. I want to go to the selection tool. I'm going to click on this here. So now that your cursor is in selection mode, so now you can click on things, you can move things around, which, don't be moving stuff around just yet. We'll get to that in a second. So now I've got my brush selected here. I'm going to go to this block here. And this is the Apply Current Texture tool. And if you click it, it applies whatever texture you have in this box to the brush that you've got selected. And so now you can see it's a much nicer looking texture, one that's more friendly and familiar and easier to see, which is very important in the early stages of development. You want your brushes to be visible, whether they be over the blackness of this void here or over the top of other brushes, because you can come back and retexture them later. All right, so now I've got this brush, but we can't do anything with it just yet because it's just a single brush. There's no world around this brush, and this brush isn't containing any worlds inside it. So what we need to do is if you mouse over your grid window and use the scroll wheel to back up just a tad, what you're going to want to do is hold down on Shift and then click and drag the brush up one notch. And that will duplicate the brush. And then you can let go of Shift once it's been duplicated and then click and drag the brush up like that. So now I've got two brushes and they're on top of each other, and I did that using my side window here, so that way I can go up and down along the Z-axis. So now that I've got two brushes, we've almost got a world inside here, but our world needs walls. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do what I just did, hold down on Shift, click, drag one notch, duplicate the brush, but I'm going to adjust the brush's size. So I do that by clicking and dragging on these boxes here. And so I'm going to drag that over so that my brush is long and skinny. And then I'm going to click and drag down like that. So now I've got a wall. And then I'm going to do exactly what I just did to duplicate the brush. Hold down on Shift, click, drag. Bam. Two walls. Now, to duplicate the brush again, I'm going to drop down here to my top window because this is along a plane that this grid right here doesn't really suit too well. Click, drag, like that. Adjust it so it's nice and small. Drag it out to fit. Boom. Voila. Now, duplicate it. Drag it all the way to the other side. And voila. We've now got a world contained inside this box. Now, what I mean when I say world is the way that the Source Engine renders worlds is it looks for where the player starts, which we haven't placed a player start entity just yet. We'll get to that in a second. It looks for where the player starts, and then it scans everything inside all of the brushes from where the player can get to. And it says that that's the world. And so it only renders what's inside the world. Anything outside the world is considered the void, and it's not rendered. And that's sort of a protocol that's left over from Source's roots in the Quake engine and the Gold Source engine. And so this is important because you don't want what are called leaks. Essentially, that is where there is a gap that allows anything inside the world to get out into the void. It creates a bridge so that the world inside is connected to the void outside. And then when Source finds that, it doesn't know what to do and it panics, and then all kinds of bad stuff happens. So we don't want that. So it doesn't look like we've got any leaks. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select the entity tool, and it's this little peg guy right here. I'm going to select him, and then we're going to go to our entities box over here. Now you can search and type in all types of different entities. There's bazillions of them. But the one that we're going to want right now is the one that actually should be in there by default, and it's info_player_start. And just go to your 3D window or your 2D window, but usually 3D window works best for placing entities. And click. And now we've got a little green man who coincidentally looks a little bit like Gordon Freeman. I'm sure that's not on purpose or anything, but now he's here. And what this does is this tells the engine we want to put a player here. Now, if you're in Team Fortress 2 or Counter-Strike and you're building multiplayer maps, I think this is how it works. You place each of these where you want players to spawn. I've never built a multiplayer map. I'm still relatively new to Hammer. I've only built single-player maps for Portal and Half-Life and what have you. Anyway, so now we've got our little green dude here who's going to tell the engine we want the player to spawn here. So the player is going to spawn in this exact position, and the player is also relatively this size. So you can use this to sort of gauge the size of your level and the size of your passages and whatnot. And right now, if you see here, this is our player and this is our world. So our world is absolutely huge. So if we zoom into our player, we're going to want to decrease our grid size quite a lot to about that. So now we can work with greater detail. So when we render the map, this is where the player is going to spawn. I think I've said that like 7 times. But our map is relatively empty. Now I'm going to save lighting for a different video because lighting can get kind of complicated, but it's actually a lot of fun and it can make your levels look very pretty. But what I will cover is the prop entity. So if you keep the entities tool selected and go over to the entities window and then type in prop, and it'll start to autofill _static. And what this will do is it will generate a prop that is static. It doesn't change. Now I'll make another video on props someday, perhaps. But essentially it places this little red box here. And what this red box is that this is an entity that can contain a model or a prop model. And so if you go back to your selection tool from your entities tool, go back to your selection tool, double click on it, and then it gives you a bunch of information about the entity. So we don't care about most of these things right now. What we care about is world model. Now, world model is what the prop's physical appearance and its collision box and whatnot. So double click on it, and this is going to bring up the model browser. Now, again, depending upon what game you're using, this will have all the assets for the game that you're working with in it. So I'm using Portal 2, and so it's got all of the assets from Portal 2 buried in here. So what I'm going to want to do is I want to create a desk. So I'm going to type in desk, and I'm going to get a variety of desks, all from the Portal 2 model files. So you can see here, if you click and drag in this box here, you can sort of look at the model, kind of see what it looks like. This grid here indicates its relative size. And then you've got a number of options right here. And one that you usually want to have checked is collision model. And this will outline the parts of the model that are hard and cannot be passed through by the player. And then there's a bunch of tabs here. Sequences is usually like animations and whatnot. Again, not important right now. Activities, again, not important. Skins, not important. Info, though, this is a little bit important because there's 3 different types of props, and we just want to look for ones that have a little check mark by the static box. So I'm going to go with this desk, and now this desk is spawned, and so I can click and drag it with my pointer, and I can move it around and do different things to it. And so, I can. If you click once inside the entity that you're manipulating, it'll switch to these circles right here. You can rotate it. So I'm going to rotate it at an angle like that. And then I'm just going to set it on the ground like that. So yeah, it's a nice little desk. All right, so now we've got a dude and a desk inside our box. So now what we're going to do is we're going to render. So you're going to want to save your map. And I'm just going to call it my underscore first underscore map. And then it's going to save it as a Valve map file or VMF. And hit save. So now what you're going to want to do is hit F9. And, oh, don't need that. And it'll bring up this little window. So ignore most of these options here because they'll be set to the right ones by default. And just pay attention to this one here. So this little thing that says don't run the game after compiling. What Hammer will automatically try and do after each time that you compile the map, it'll try and start Portal 2 or whatever game you're using. And then it'll try and load the map. But if you already have the game running, then check this box and then just hit OK. And then in the console within the game, just type in the name of your map and load it from the console. And that'll save you a lot of time because you don't have to restart the game every single time you want to view your map, which is really great. So, but we don't have Portal 2 running just yet. So we're going to leave it like that. And then I'm going to hit this button and it's going to render, and it'll render really fast. And then it's going to jump into Portal 2. All right, so we're inside our map. And as you can see, we're inside this room. There's no dynamic lighting or anything because we haven't put in any light entities just yet. But we do have our little desk that we placed. So you can see here the desk is neatly sitting on the ground. The textures look okay. And yeah, we've got a world. So we can jump up on the desk. Yep, there we go. And yeah, we have now built a world inside of Hammer. So yeah, that's basically, I think, all I'm going to cover in this video. If you guys have any questions, just leave them down in the comments. I'll try and answer them. Like I said, I'm new to Hammer, and if you guys want to see more in the future, I probably will putting out more videos. So yeah, anyways, I'll see you guys next time.